This, we're joined by the president and COO of West End Financial Advisors, Kevin Kramer, back with us for round two. Kevin, good to have you this morning.
Thank you.
You know, 6 months ago, we said that's when TARP actually started. 6 months ago, if you said stress tests, it wouldn't be related to a bank. Do you feel more optimistic about the financial sector now that the idea of a stress test is in the mix?
I feel that there's been an ongoing kind of kabuki dance going on between the feds and the banks. I think it's important to remember that there's still literally tens of billions of dollars of toxic assets on their balance sheets. There was a lot of creative accounting, hocus pocus that went on in the earnings reports to dress them up and make them look pretty. But the bottom line reality here is the banks are still operating, many of the big ones, under distress, and they need the money and they need the assistance.
Okay, but to you as an investor, someone who's in this market, do you feel better, or is this kind of a moot point still?
I think it's a moot point. I think until they recognize some of these losses, until we reach a decision point about whether or not certain banks should fail, I think this malaise will persist, and we're going to ride peaks and valleys here associated with it.
Which is supposed to be the point of the stress test, separating who's good and who's bad. Whether or not they're going to do that will be the big question on May 4th. Now, the TARP is the other issue. As Peter mentioned, there's a number of these banks that mentioned yesterday, hey, we want to pay it back. Now there's this negotiation on the value of the warrants. Now, we as taxpayers, we want these warrants to be worth as much as possible, right? Because it's our money. However, you know, the banks, and they want it to be, they don't want to be paying back too much to the government because the warrants are worth less than the stocks are trading. I mean, how do we resolve this?
Well, you know, it's kind of analogous to having the feds perform life-saving surgery on somebody. The patient now is in the process of recovering and they don't want to pay the bill. There is a bill to be paid here. They did receive federal monies. They received a bailout. And I think they have an obligation to
they argue the rules were changed in the middle of the game, but you say, hey, listen, pay your money back.
Exactly. I'm sure every investor out there in America would have liked a do-over to last summer to have their portfolios reset, and if it cost them 5 or 10 or 15% of that worth, they would be happy to pay it. So
we'll watch how that plays. That's going to be interesting back and forth. Kevin, thank you.
You're welcome.
Kramer will be with us all morning.
And more banks to come this morning as well. Financial advisors. And Kevin, it's interesting to look at the actual numbers. You still have revenue of more than $1 billion. Of course, nothing compared to the growth years. But still, the company is earning $1 billion in revenue in 3 months?
Yep, I think that's an indication of a very solid core franchise here. Look, I think this is a half full rather than half empty kind of story. Their core business, their homepage, their email, their finance page do quite well. Carol Bartz, excuse me, has got her work cut out for her, but I think she's doing the right things. And it's going to take a couple quarters, but they're a global franchise, and I think she will find ways to invigorate the company and get revenues back on track.
How do you do that? Because what Yahoo is essentially doing now is cutting costs. It's cutting, and she's been very aggressive. She said she was going to, and she has been very aggressive in cutting costs. But other companies are positioning themselves to come out of the recession by spending in technology, at least on new, on new devices or new services or whatever the case may be. Whereas Yahoo maybe is not ready to do that yet. Aren't they going to be behind the 8 ball a little bit?
No, I don't believe so. I think what they're doing is shedding non-critical assets. There's certain components of their business, hot jobs and others, they're looking to sell off. They're right-sizing, and again, their revenues are wholly dependent on what's going on in the economy, what corporations are doing in terms of advertising and marketing. So, of course, they're going to feel the impact of a recession. So I think they'll be well poised. I think they'll be a leaner company and a stronger company for it.
It's interesting because we know that you look at franchises and like to target some of them in the restaurant and commercial real estate sector more specifically, but you really think that this is a franchise that actually can survive without actually teaming up with a Microsoft, for example?
Oh, I think they might find partnerships where it makes sense, and clearly Microsoft would be one of those. But they've been around since the go-go days of the dot-com boom. They've got a huge installed consumer base, and yeah, they're here to stay.
All right, good enough, Kevin Kramer. Yep. Well, they are certainly one of the originals, so to speak. The internet, I guess, is one of the ways to look at it. Thank you, Kevin. Now, Yahoo reported last is back with us to talk some more about it. And I should say, Kevin, just for people's information, you have some experience in the industry, right? You worked at MBNA for a while, and
that's correct. I worked 3 years at Citigroup, and then after that, 12 years at MBNA America.
So you come at it, I would think, from the industry's point point of view, or at least knowing what goes on inside an industry like this, is something that scares you, that the government's coming after credit card rates?
I think what's going on is by Congress, by certain senators, is a lot of bashing of the industry without a full understanding of the consequences of the changes that they're requesting.
Or what's the worst consequence? What would be a negative of something that would come out of this?
Credit cards fuel our consumer economy. We use them, they're ubiquitous, they're safe, they're secure, they allow us to buy things, they allow us to establish credit history. If all of a sudden you put so many constraints on them that issuers are forced to curtail who they lend to and how much they lend to, that's going to spill over into the broader economy.
Don't we need some sort of common sense moves here, or no? I mean, in other words, aren't the lenders should take some responsibility for?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, for example?
And changes have been made, and the Fed regulations have already been articulated and approved. And Congress essentially is just waving their hand and stepping in to say, oh, we're the guys who really did it, when in fact it was already done.
But some people complaining, for example, like with their rates just skyrocketing up, even though they have good credit. I don't know if some of those stories are true or not, but that's been what the reports have been. Should the industry take some responsibility for that type of thing? And if so, what can they do differently? Yeah,
I think the industry is, in fact, trying to be much more responsible. Rates get changed on individual borrowers if they show distress with other borrowers. If you had a friend who came and asked you for money and you found out he borrowed from 6 other people and never paid him back, you might they might give you some pause before you lend him some money.
Before you lend money to that person. All right, final thing you mentioned, and this would be from the consumer side of it as opposed to the industry side of it, you mentioned the positives of credit cards. What should be the goal, though, for consumers? Should they be looking to wean themselves off the use of credit cards longer term, or do you look at it and say, you know what, it's up to the individual person, you want to go into debt, go ahead and do it?
You know, 90% of credit card users use them very responsibly, and they manage their household budgets very responsibly. They pay off their bills when they're due. They don't get in distress. So, you know, I would encourage everybody to be responsible around those sorts of behaviors, and use credit responsibly and not run up excessive charges. Clearly, people have been living beyond their means, and that's the issue.
Right. Yes. Okay. Kevin, thank you very much. Appreciate your perspective on that. And now we're going to head back over